Welcome to Indo-American Arts Council's annual literary festival. Indo-American Arts Council is a not-for-profit organization with the goal of bringing Indian artistic disciplines to North America. It was established about 20 years back. It celebrates Indian culture and heritage by organizing film, music, dance, art, and literary festivals. It brings to America India's age-old, continuously living civilization and its contribution to the world of art and literature. This year we are celebrating Literary Festival by bringing you authors, storytellers, thought-provoking writers covering a large, old, multifaceted Indian civilization. Literary Festival will cover commentaries on 2,400-year-old Chanakya's writing, Chanakya Niti, to 1,000-year-old Shamendra's 3 satires from Kashmir, to modern-day issues of relevance and issues of inquiry. Many of these stories have originated from India, but many writers are Indo-American, and their experiences and understanding and concerns and expression may be different. But as Radhakrishnan put it in his preface to Bhagavad Gita, wrote, every book has some eternal truths and values that are relevant to all times and all people, and other things that are interpreted by different people in different times. That is how I read these books. That's how I interpret it. That's how we interpret them and see their relevance to us and our times and shape our thinking. I don't want to take too much time, so that we can hear today's discussion. So I'm going to introduce to the audience Consul General Randhir Jaiswal. You can see him on the screen. Welcome to you, Mr. Jaiswal. Recently, you took over one of India's most important diplomatic posts here in New York City. So New York City and all the Indo-American community here welcomes you. Mr. Jaiswal is a career diplomat who joined Indian Foreign Services in 1998. He has served in Portugal, Cuba, South Africa, and at Permanent Mission of India in New York. So he's familiar with New York. In between his overseas assignment, he has had multiple appointments, including Joint Secretary, managing President of India's International Relations portfolio. Consul General is linguist, at least in speaking many languages. He speaks Hindi, English, Portuguese, and Spanish. And I guess you may understand French and other Romance Latin languages also. You probably are conversant in that also. So welcome, Consul General. Consul General is going to be the moderator today. He's going to interview our author today. And at this time, I'm going to introduce Aditya Narayan Darya Sheel Haksar. There is a little kinship here because both of us are Kashmiris, and he's one of the few Kashmiris with that long a name. And it might be the influence of coming to plains from Kashmir. He is a career diplomat and a reputed translation of Sanskrit classics. Born in Gwalior, he attended Doon School, Allahabad University, and eventually Oxford University in England. He served as Indian High Commissioner to Kenya, Seychelles, and then Ambassador to Portugal and Yugoslavia. He also served as Dean of Indian Foreign Service Institute and President of the United Nations Environment Program's Governing Council. Mr. Haksar's Sanskrit translations are increasingly focused on Katha literature, a tradition which has been somewhat overlooked, and a vast tradition. And his list of his works are exhaustive. If I go over them, it will take me a long time. And he's noted for his collections of these translations. And his Katha translations include Shuka Sapti, Madhava Nala Katha, Samya Matrika, and he has translated tales from Pachtantra, from Hitopadesha, from Dandin's Tale of Ten Princes, and it keeps on going to the Vatsyayana's Kama Sutra, Seduction of Shiva, Raghuvamsha, Ritu Samhara, Kalidasa's books. So the list is huge and long, so I'm not going to go through all. But I'll hand it over now to welcome Mr. Haksar, and I'll ask Mr. Jaiswal to take over now and enrich all of us, all the audience that are here now. Thank you very much, both.
Well, good morning, Dr. Mattoo, and thank you for giving me the baton. It's a sheer delight and a pleasure for me to be with Ambassador Haksar for this conversation, and I thank Indo-American Arts Council for making this possible. You know, I met Ambassador Haksar last at the Foreign Service Institute in 1999, and that was in the Chanakya Hall of the Foreign Service Institute. And today, what a delight that we are meeting after these many long years over a conversation over Chanakya Niti. So that makes it, Ambassador, our connection after so many years and several decades, that special. You know, I've been through, today here we are to discuss your two books. You've written a lot. We have seen your contribution to Sanskrit literature and to bringing them to the general audience in India, to people who speak other languages and may not be conversant with Sanskrit. So you've done very well in terms of your contribution. Today, of course, we are here to discuss two of your books, Chanakya Niti, and the other one, Three Satires from Ancient Kashmir by Kshemendra. I've been through both the books. The one on Chanakya Niti, of course, is a sheer delight, and we'll talk about that first. You know, it is a world in itself. Chanakya talks about trade, he talks about commerce, he talks about warfare, he talks about possibly everything on earth. You know, every aspect of human endeavor he has talked about. And in the book, and what we are going to discuss today, centers around, in a sense, you know, the depth of Indian thought, Indian philosophy, Indian knowledge, Indian culture in general. So I guess we'll have a lively conversation, and the audience of the Indo-American Arts Council, the Literary Festival, they have a lot to enjoy through this session today. First of all, Ambassador Haksar, Chanakya's verses, you've done very well to bring all these verses from multiple sources together at one place. But these verses are available to our readers in English, in earlier translations. But in what way is your work different from those earlier works? And what should the readers be looking at in your work? If you can focus on that, and thereafter we'll take the conversation forward.
Well, thank you very much, both gentlemen, for the kind words you have said about me. And I want to tell you both that it is a great pleasure for me to be speaking with you today, my time this evening, your time this morning, in New York, a place where I had the honor and the privilege of living 50 years ago. So I know New York, and I know many things about New York from those days, because after that I had many occasions to come back and visit the place. But that is another subject totally. And in answer to your question, I would like to tell you that the verses of Chanakya is known by two names today. One is Chanakya One is Kautilya. His actual name, in fact, was Vishnugupta. Chanakya is paternal name, Kautilya is a clan name. But his works, and in Sanskrit literature, there are books which describe him as a person with all the three names. So it is no doubt that this is all one person. It so happens that today, the Arthashastra of Kautilya is better known around the world. And Arthashastra is a technical book about government and administration. When it first got translated into European languages, European scholars started comparing Kautilya to Machiavelli, because they said that just as Machiavelli has written about politics in Europe, so Kautilya was writing about politics in India many, many centuries before that. So that is very good. But it so happened that, as happens in modern day communications, focus on the Arthashastra has led to a reduction of focus on Chanakya Niti. And you will be interested to know that the Chanakya Niti verses on life and living, they are not technical verses. They are simple, direct language of observation and advice about how to live in life. Social, economic, in all kinds of ways. And these verses, over the centuries, have been very widespread in India, not only in India, but with Indian culture. They traveled all over the world, where Indian influence and Indian culture traveled in the ancient days, in Southeast Asia, in the Middle East, in North Asia, and so on. And in India, they have been frequently quoted, frequently included in anthologies, so they are very well known in India this day. And you asked me, he says, what about the other translations? Now, this is something which I'd like to point out to you. There are now modern scholars have been able to gather together all the Chanakya verses which are going around. And they find that all together, there is an aggregate of something like 1,500 Chanakya verses. And these 1,500 Chanakya verses are found, scholars find, in 6 main recensions today. And out of these 6 recensions, one recension has, for various reasons, become much better known than the other 5. And most of the translations and the books which you find about Chanakya Niti, not only in English translations, but in Hindi translations and in other language translations, they are all based mainly on one recension of a corpus which is called Chanakya Niti. And that one recension is known as the Vriddha Chanakya. And Vriddha here doesn't mean old. The Sanskrit meaning of the word Vriddha is expanded, bigger in size. Now, what I have tried to do in this book, which I have presented, is to bring a collection of verses from all the 6 recensions of Chanakya. Not only the Vriddha Chanakya, but from the Chanakya Niti Sara, the Chanakya Rajaniti Shastra, which is the longest one, and which traveled northwards, got translated into Tibetan almost 1,000 years ago. And, they are all over the place. So I think that the little book that I have done, it is a collection of something like just over 300 verses chosen from all the totality of the Chanakya Niti verses, so that the reader can have an opportunity of seeing Chanakya Niti verses in all its dimensions. And this is why I was very pleased to do this book, and this is why my publishers, Penguin, were very keen to bring it out. And when we were discussing this, we had a big debate. I wanted to make the book much larger because there are so many verses, but they said that for publication purposes, an ideal number would be about 300. So that's what I've got. And I spent more time in selecting them than in making the actual translations. But these are the verses which have come out and which you have talked about. And they have been very well received. And this is how we are going on.
Well, thank you, Ambassador Haksar. So I see that, your book has a compilation of 300 verses that you've distilled for the readers. So I guess, you made life so much easier for our audience watching the Indo-American Arts Council Fest. Those, of course, who are interested in geopolitics, and this city is a geopolitical city. For them, I would urge them, encourage them to have a look at all that Chanakya has to say about life and politics. And you have made life easy for them through your translations, and also, in a sense, you've distilled it for them. So, taking forward, I have, I've been through these verses, and every second or third verse I see that is focused on knowledge, on learning, on wisdom. Now that's natural, because here is a man who is a man of high scholarship. It's obvious that he'll emphasize so much on knowledge and learning in daily life. But he was also a man, as I understand, as a student of history, a lot who was focused on karma, to do things. So, in a sense, what do you see? Why he's so much focused on Gyan Marg? In a sense, is it a duality that he's dealing with, or shall we say that all important people have this duality when they're juggling with several aspects of life? What are your thoughts on this? And also, both for the present and future generations, we all living in a knowledge-based society. In the years to come and decades to come, our life is going to be a lot more governed by knowledge and information and technology. So in such an age, what does a person of the stature of Chanakya, who emphasized so much about knowledge, have to offer or inspire them?
Well, you have posed a very wide-ranging question, and I'm glad that you have posed it in philosophical terms. I would like to take this opportunity of pointing out that these Chanakya verses, which I spent a great deal of time in culling out of the total collection, are very simple, easy to understand, and easy to recite and to hear. These verses, they are ideal verses for memorization in an age when written books were very rare. And this is why they have been circulating for such a long time. And their main focus, as I was able to see, was on life in those days and the art of living in those days. Not so much about metaphysical philosophy, jnana or karma or anything of that nature, but about how to get on in life, how to lead a useful, beneficial, and altogether trouble-free life as far as possible. And the verses, I'll take this opportunity to mention this to you. In fact, I will quote to you a couple of translations. One verse which attracted me in the course of my selection of Chanakya Niti verses, you will find it somewhere. It's a small verse about how to bring up your child. No politics, no philosophy, straightforward, how to bring up your child. Spoil him for the first 5 years. For the next 10, discipline him. But when the child becomes 16, treat him like a friend. And these are qualities, advice offered 2000 years ago, but it seems to me still extremely relevant to this day. I want to give you another idea how these verses he says, he speaks before you sweetly, but spoils the work behind your back. Such a friend should be discarded. He's a poisoned pot with some milk on top. This also conveys thoughts first expressed 2000 years ago, but it seems to me extremely relevant to this very day. Now, I could go on and give you many such verses, but I'd leave that to readers to read or hear when they see the book. But all the Chanakya Niti is observation of this kind on different aspects of life and so on. Since I have the privilege just now of speaking with another senior diplomat who is in a fraternity where I used to be many, many years ago, I might point out to you that in his description of things, he has not left out diplomacy also. And there are a couple of verses, you will find them yourself. I will not read out to you the translation, explaining what make good qualities of an ambassador. He should be able to understand what others are thinking, to convey and correct their impression. But the line of Chanakya which impressed me, Chanakya's words in Sanskrit are Yathokta Vadi, to speak as you are instructed. This is a very important description and requirement of a diplomat. So, you will find all kinds of verses like this, covering all aspects of life as you go through it.
Well, thank you, Ambassador. On diplomacy, you have given me ideas. I saw one verse which attracted me a lot, and I have some ideas to how to deal with it in this office space and also in the permanent mission of India at the UN that we have on the 43rd Street. So I could get a sense that, while we are dealing with a scholar and intellect, but Chanakya was also a very pragmatic man. And for that reason, he has given details as to how you must engage with people, with politics, with things, with books, with children, with a young man, so on and so forth. I guess, if we have to do a little more research on him, there'll be several new aspects of his thought which will come out, and he's obviously a person that needs to be researched a lot more in terms of his subjects and also his personality. Now, the next point that I would like to raise with you, and I raise this deliberately, in India, we are doing a lot to promote women empowerment. There is huge amount of things that are happening with women in public space. When I was with the President of India, and we had opportunity to travel to several universities in India, and every university at the convocation, if there were 100 scholars who were to be given awards by the president, invariably 90 to 95% of them were women. So we are dealing with a new reality in India, and for that reason, uh, and that this city and this country emphasizes so much on women and gender issues. I would like to follow up on a conversation centered around women in Kautilya. I see that he has devoted a lot of time in his verses to women in various roles, as daughters, as girls, as wives, so on and so forth. He accords high respect to them, as you rightly said in your book. But at the same time, he sees them in a traditional construct, traditional context. Um, Again, I see in one of the verses he attaches very high importance to their intellect, to their wisdom, to their foresight, to their courage. Again, there is a duality I see. While he emphasizes on the traditional role, at the same time he says that they are as smart as the menfolk or even more. Now, my question to you is: was he mirroring the times that he was living in, or was he, in a sense, trying to say what should be the best for the society in terms of engaging women?
Well, that kind of question is very difficult to answer honestly, because we have our knowledge of the social background in which that man lived and the psychological background in which he was brought up. We have very little knowledge of these things. And I prefer not to get into speculation and come out with ideas. Many scholars do, and there is plenty of speculative material about him. What we know is that he was born in modern-day Bihar. He left Bihar because the then king and his father fell apart, and he went away from there to the northwest, and he went to Taxila, then known as Takshashila, nowadays in modern Pakistan, and he spent his younger days there. That is where he got his education and knowledge and so on. And when he was prepared with all this, then he came back. And when he came back, there were political disturbances going on in Bihar and Pataliputra, and in circumstances which have been, as much as we know, have been put out, and I've given no details in my introduction and so on. That is the time when he gave support to a young man who then became first the king and then the founder of an empire, the Mauryan Empire. And as a person, all we know about him is that he had come from a poor background. He was not personally, physically very nice to look at, but he had a very, very sharp mind. Now, from all this, we can draw our conclusions as to what prompted him to do what he did. All that we can say is, honestly, that here was a man who was living at a time which his own intellectual qualities able to observe very clearly, and with his intellectual qualities to come to conclusions, which he's put in his verse. So this is the most we can say about him. And the relevance for all this for today, I think there are two important relevances of these verses for today. One relevance is comparatively academic. These verses reflect the society in which he lived. And that was 2000 years ago. And for anyone who reads them carefully and observes the society in India today, it is an interesting thing to figure out how much of the qualities that he has described still pertain in India to this day. Because he prints a social picture, and that social picture, of course, has changed in a very many ways, but some aspects remain the same. So this is a subject which is worth studying. And the second subject, as you say very rightly, is the need for a deeper and greater research to establish what motivated him and what exactly was his jnana and karma, as you have very kindly and very pointedly said. And I believe that to bring out a small edition of his verses now will give people an opportunity, those who read them firstly. It's a small book which many people can read. It is easy to handle. It's not a heavy, big, scholarly piece, but it's a piece for general reading that I have written. And people may read it, and from that they may then come to further conclusions, and maybe it will encourage people to engage in deeper research. And that is what my hope is.
Well, thank you, Ambassador. Now, obviously we're dealing with a person who's wholesome, who's very pragmatic, at the same time philosophical. And I see that in all the verses that you've put in your book, there is this strong tendency on the part of Kautilya or Chanakya to tell his audience that, balance of conduct or balance of anything is central to life. Now, we see this balance or the emphasis of balance in various other aspects of our tradition and culture, especially of those times, be it, the Madhyamarga of Buddha, be it yoga or Ayurveda. In yoga, there's always a balance. If you do one yoga on the left side, you have to do yoga on the right side to attain that equilibrium and balance. It's somehow it is one aspect of Indian culture which is actually very deep as to why we always seeking balance. Could be because we are always looking for harmony with nature. It could be because, or could be that, he was trying to emphasize on balance because of, Patliputra and Magad empire of that time was producing huge amounts of surplus. And it was a society which was complex. There was a society which was in a flux. And possibly it could be that he was therefore emphasizing a lot on balance. How do you look at this aspect of his niti that he's put in several of his verses?
Well, I must congratulate you on your own reading of the verses and coming to your own conclusions. And I would say that it simply points out the fact that these verses give the reader an opportunity to draw many different kinds of conclusions, including a very nice conclusion that you have drawn. What exactly was prompting him, and why exactly did he use this way of addressing himself? It is very difficult for anyone to say. And honestly, I'm not so much into the scholarly analysis. My purpose was to provide a translation which could be easy to read and easy to follow. And my own feeling is what I found very attractive in the Chanakya Niti verses is the style in which they are written. Compared to much other Sanskrit verse literature, they are exceedingly simple. It is possible to follow their literal meanings without reference to dictionaries or anything of that kind. And then not only they are simple in meaning, but the language itself is simple. It is devoid of too many embellishments, too many alankaras, things like that, to make it very easy to read. And my own impression is that these verses were composed in order to enable people to hear them and then to remember them. So this is the very important part of Sanskrit literature, the emphasis on enabling readers or hearers to remember. Because, in those days, writing things down, reading them out of books and so on was much less. Everything was carried out by memory. This is my guess.
Well, talking of memory, you bring me to the oral traditions of India. Ambassador Haksar, you had a live experience with Chanakya Niti as part of diplomacy, of course, and as part of your scholarship. My lived experience with Chanakya Niti has been the exchanges I have had with my parents back home, with my village folk in rural Bihar. And one of the words that I still recount and recall is I would like to read out for you and for the audience. Chanakya, and this, I never knew that it is a variation of Chanakya Niti. That could be so. And it shows that how Chanakya, even though not learnt by people, it has the Niti and his verses and his thought has permeated in our daily life and has been so for centuries. So one verse that I picked up, it goes like this: worship of Shiva, cultivation of millet, and company of wise men or wise people never fail. Now in Hindi or in Bhojpuri it would go like this: शंकर के पूजा, मरुआ के खेती, अब बड़े आदमी के संगत कभी खराब नहीं जाता है. So this I learned growing up in Bihar, but I see that in one of the verses, and I will slowly try to read out for the audience, and it is, in a sense, borrow from there, or it would have got, when passed on from one generation to the other, it got slightly more, slightly changed, interpolated. There is one which talks here of which says, attention to virtue in speech, sweetness, and eagerness for charity, with friends, honesty, elders' courtesy, and seriousness in one's mind. Pure behavior, love for merits of scriptures, knowledge in looks, beauty. And to Shiva, I repeat, and to Shiva, all devotion. All these are seen in good folk only. So, my sense is that we would have a lot more of Chanakya's verses in our oral traditions in India. It could perhaps be an important research project, and you would agree with that. If we can look at how Chanakya is prevalent in our everyday lives in various parts of India, not just in Bihar, but other parts of India. Your thoughts on oral traditions and Chanakya Niti?
Well, as you very nicely put it, I would like to mention to you that because of these qualities, both the simplicity of the meaning and the simplicity of expression, Chanakya Niti verses have been traveling all over this country in India, and they have been subject to translation in practically all Indian languages. And they have provided inspiration in different languages, different modes of what he said originally in Sanskrit. The example that you have quoted is a good example. What is prevalent in Bihar and what is found, what is probably written there 2000 years ago. So this kind of thing you have. But it is interesting to find that Chanakya Niti verses are found, no part of the country can say that there's more of it there than anywhere else. It's spread all over the place. And my own hope is that this little book that I have done may encourage others to go beyond the 300 verses I have done, and out of that huge collection, which is 1500, to bring out another lot, because a lot of them deserve to be known and read today. And I'm hoping that someone will be, or others will be motivated to do that kind of thing.
Thank you, sir. And my final thoughts before we move on to the next book, Ambassador Haksar, how do you think, we can, Chanakya Niti has lived with us on this earth for the last 2000 years. It must continue its onward journey. And in that regard, how do you think we can make Chanakya and his wisdom more relevant for the millennials, for our youth? They are very perspective people. I've seen their judgment, in their energy, in terms of ideas. They can really bring a lot of wisdom from Chanakya onto modern life. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, my thought is very simple on that. One important feature of relevance is accessibility. And one feature which has, I think, tended to limit our viewing of what is available in Sanskrit is that accessibility has become more and more limited because of scholarly and other reasons. Most people who are wanting to read things in Sanskrit or have learned to read in Sanskrit have to go through lots of research material, academic material before they can actually come to what is the substance of the thing. And this Chanakya Niti which I have put out, one hope in doing it was to make this knowledge accessible to more and more people. And I'm hoping that this accessibility will also attract the interest of the younger generation. And when they have access to something which is very simple to read, they will themselves discover without having to be, taught or exhorted, they will discover for themselves the relevance of these verses for their life today.
Thank you, Haksar Saab, and I think that gives some sort of food for thought for Indo-American Arts Council. We need to have more and more young people and the millennials connected to this platform. You're mute.
Dr. Mattoo is gone mute. He's got to.
Dr. Mattoo, please unmute करिए अपना Skype पे ऊपर वो mute का होगा उसको उस पे जो है ना आइकन पे जाके आप उसको unmute कर दीजिए.
Am I unmuted now?
Yeah.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. No, I've been listening to this wonderful discussion, and I used to read Kale's book, who translated Arthashastra, a very technical book, and I'd gone through it since I was going to be here. But in these aphorisms that you've translated, I just wanted to get into his mind a little bit. Kautilya's mind, and sometimes he goes to the extreme that Machiavelli looks like a choir boy in front of him, and is it because for expediency's sake, or how he got to control such a big empire, brought Chandragupta Maurya in that position from Nanda Empire, what games he played or what he did. Something in the Vrida, this thing, he says, do not trust one, your translation, trust one, not a friend, and not too much, even a friend. For when annoyed with you, the later can your secrets public make. So that means it's basically saying don't trust anyone. Am I right getting into his mind? That is he more or less saying that he was? Haksar Saab, what do you think?
I think that the verse simply points out the actualities of life as he saw it. Instead of getting into speculation about whether he was wanting to point out something or anything like that, this is the way he expresses himself. And it is worthwhile to know. I should like to tell you at this moment, this will be worth. You talked about Arthashastra. Everyone knows about the Arthashastra now, it's been all over the place. The Arthashastra itself begins with detailed references to previous works on which it is based. So it means that that literature had been going on in Sanskrit and in our culture for a long time. And what people don't know today is that Arthashastra was not the final seal on scholarly research on government and politics and so on. Arthashastra was followed by a whole list of similar works which were written over the centuries. Some of them are very much worthwhile being translated and read today.
No, obviously these thought processes were there. Like one you have this CV 3.1. Which family is free of fault? Which person has not suffered disease? Who has not faced adversities? Whose happiness is permanent? It's like Buddha giving a sermon to the lady whose child had died. And it's basically same thing that is put here. Also, one more thing that was interesting in trying to get into his mind, he says, too upright, straight one should not be. Go to forests and there see straight trees cut down repeatedly. While standing, stay crooked. Whereas when we talk to our children or we talk, if you're going, in Mahabharata and Krishna, you see a little bit bending to, you can justify the means to get to the ends. I'll come into Ramayana, Ramaraja, where you cannot. And that is the conflict in a lot of our minds, whereas he seems to go on to the other side. And sometimes some contradictory statements he has made, which I wasn't sure about. He says, where is it? He says, do not be afraid of terror as long as it has not occurred. And seeing it has come to be, then resist fearlessly. Whereas earlier he says, for fearful famines and epidemics, from attacks by the enemy and from contact with the wicked, to stay alive, one has to flee. So there are little bit different takes on the similar situation, but in a different way.
Well, I'm very glad that this discussion that we are having and access to the book has encouraged you to now look into it deeply. And the very first verse which you mentioned about the straight and the crooked tree was another Chanakya verse which attracted me when I first began my selection and translation. And it is and I found that it was not myself alone, but in all the reviews and so on which have taken place with this book, many people have pointed to this verse, that he is not just trying to be goody-goody, he's trying to point out how life actually is. But you said that now we must move on to the other book.
Yes. So let's move to the next book, Ambassador. And before we go into the subject of the book, I would like you to tell our audience little more about the Kshemendra, because he seems to be a scholar par excellence. He's a person who has a very wide canvas, but somehow, in a scheme of things, in the way history is laid out in schools, etc., he doesn't occupy the same prominence. But here we are dealing with a person who's a literary giant. He's part and parcel of the cultural effervescence of Kashmir of 11th century.
Well, I'm very glad that you've asked me this question, Consul General. And one reason which led me to make Kshemendra translations, I must tell you, this is not the only one, I've done some others too, was to bring a person's reputation, which has now got overshadowed over centuries for a variety of reasons, out before people again today. Now, Kshemendra verses, he has given a little bit of his life history in some of his books, so we have a fair idea of when he lived and what was his life background and so on, which I will not go into just now. You can find that in my introduction there. But he, if I may so put it, is well known in Sanskrit literature and historical literature of Kashmir. As you might know, Kashmir, Sanskrit literature in Kashmir had a very strong historical angle. There were many Raja Taranginis written there, and Kshemendra is mentioned in them. So he's a person who was noted there. And Kshemendra verses are found in anthologies of Sanskrit verse from different parts of the country. But somehow it so happened that over the centuries, his verses, his books went into oblivion. And in modern times, the first Kshemendra work which was discovered not in Kashmir, but in Tanjore. So it gives you an idea of how far Kshemendra's writings had spread all over the country. And then the interesting thing about Kshemendra is that he was a writer on multiple things. What I have translated is his satires, but he is now better known for his grammatical and poetical works. The part of Kshemendra which has been more noticed and more looked into and translated in recent decades are his works on what constitutes good literature, what constitutes correct pronunciations, and things like that. But this has had the effect of obscuring and overshadowing other parts of his literature. He has written, for example, he's got a summary of the Ramayana. He made a summary of the Mahabharata. They exist. They are fine summaries, but people have lost track of them. And then what I thought deserves to be brought into the public domain now is his satires. Firstly, people nowadays do not associate satire with Sanskrit literature at all. Though there is a lot of satire in Sanskrit literature, but people seem to have forgotten it because it was overshadowed by other things, by philosophical, religious, and other kind of literature. Secondly, satire in Kashmir was practically unknown. And thirdly, the satire in Kashmir, as written by Kshemendra, is a very precise and interesting reflection of the social life which obtained in Kashmir during his time, and which can be found in different parts of this country even to this day. These three satires, which I translated, go in depth in a humorous way to point to corruption in government, hypocrisy in religious practice, to greedy dealings in trade and business. He picks up all these subjects and deals with them in great detail. This is something which is worth knowing I thought that I take this opportunity. We are now living in a world where there is so much talk about bureaucracy, good things and bad things and all that. Here is my translation. Plundered by the bureaucrat, the state's afflicted prosperity weeps dark tears that seem to be ink drops dripping from his pen. And there are a whole lot of references to bureaucratic practices. One of the three satires is entirely about how bureaucracy runs a village in Kashmir. But in many ways, it may be a village, any part of India where the bureaucracy was then running it. And similarly, so these are works which are of great interest from that point of view, apart from their humorous and comic aspects. And this is what chose me to bring these Shemendra translations before the reader of today. All these three translations in this book had been translated earlier, but they were all scholarly works. One was done in the United States 50 years ago. Another was done in Calcutta, maybe 30 or 40 years ago. And the last one was done in Germany, only about 15 years ago. But they were all scholarly works, difficult for the general reader to peruse and use. So I thought to myself that these satires needed a presentation to a wider audience in simpler language, which will reflect the quality of what he says. And this is why I've done these three satires, and I'm glad to tell you that they have been found quite interesting by many people who have come across them.
Well, thank you, Ambassador. You know, you have made life simpler for all those who want to delve deep into literature coming out of Kashmir, especially from ancient times. As you rightly said, your work is different in the sense it's simple for readers, it is easy for them to grasp, whereas the earlier translations were more of higher scholar or more scholarly nature. So, in a sense, you're bringing these works to a much larger, a wider audience. What fascinates me about Shemendra is that he's of course, as you said, the canvas is wide and he's very eclectic because he deals with themes from all thoughts. You know, he writes on Hindu themes, he writes on Buddhist themes. But what amazed me, and I gotten to think about it, that how come it was possible for a person to achieve so much without royal patronage, and or what were the reasons as to why the royalty did not engage him? So possibly, history of that time would throw some light on that, or possibly he was too independent-minded, like several others of such literary giants that we've had.
Well, you see, interesting thing is, in Shivendra's work, he has given here and there small details about himself and his life, which scholars have put together. So we have a fair idea of when he lived, which was at the end of the 10th century and the beginning of the 11th century. That's about 1,000 years ago. And about his family from which he was born, and the teachers under whom he studied, and so on. And from all these details, it is quite clear that he came from a well-off family and he lived in well-off circumstances. He did not need outside assistance from anyone. So far as the royalty is concerned, in the very first book of these satires, the name of which is Narma Mala, or a book of a garland of mirth, that begins with an extensive praise of the then king of Kashmir, Anand. You can see it for yourself. So it is not as if he completely ignored rulers and so on. In some other works also he has done that, but on the other hand, he has not done it everywhere. And the interesting thing about this Narmamala is, and especially since our moderator is Dr. Mattoo from Kashmir directly, is that in the very first sentence of Narmamala, he describes Kashmir as the foremost of prosperous land. So well organized that it can be a subject of jealousy even for heaven. So you see, obviously he lived at a time 1,000 years ago when Kashmir was in a good condition. I should take this opportunity of mentioning to you that another translation of Kshemendra's satire which I did, which no one had ever translated before. The name of that translation, also published by Penguin, is Samaya Matrika, English title of which is The Courtesan's Keeper. And that is a wonderful account of the life in the red light district of what today is called Srinagar and what in Kshemendra's time was called Tawarupur. So you see, you have these kinds of things, and it is interesting to find that such material is available, but the way the concentration on Sanskrit reading and studies in recent centuries has been, much of this material has, got overshadowed. And there's much more material like this which is available, not only from Kashmir, but from other parts of the country, which needs to be looked into.
Thank you, Haksar Saab. My final thoughts on your three satires from ancient Kashmir by Kshemendra's. He, as I went through the book, and you have mentioned that his style is very different of writing. He's of his own kind. He is unusual in the usage of his vocabulary. Is unusual in the usage of puns. He's unusual in the usage of compounds and words. So how do you look at his style? And also, of the three satires, Narmamala, Kalavilas, and Deso Padesa, all the three have different settings. How do you? Which one is your favorite? And what do they talk about? What do they reflect in deep terms about Kashmir of those times?
Well, if you ask me such a personal question, I'll tell you the one which I like most is the shortest, the briefest, which is the last one. The one which is called Deshopadesh, advice from the countryside. The reason is that one satire, Narmamala, from which I quoted to begin with, is the longest, and it is actually a small novel. It gives the life in a particular village, and in describing the life in the village, it describes in detail bureaucratic problems and the problems posed in the village by the priests and problems posed by many other things. The second one, Kala Vilas, dalliance with deception, is in some ways the most traditional of Kshemendra's satirical works. Because in keeping with the line of similar stories, he has 7 chapters or so in Kala Vilas. Each chapter contains a story, and with the story, he comes to satirical conclusions about what they are all about. One story is not about human beings at all. It is a story about disputes and trickery on money matters between gods. So he doesn't leave the gods outside his satirical writing also. Shukra and
Kubera.
Shukra and Kuber, things like that, you see. So, and then the third one, Deshopadesh, has no story. It is simply a collection of brief pointed, verse pictures describing different kinds of people in a society. And that is really wonderful to read, in my opinion. And that is something which I hope others will read and be encouraged to go into further into Sanskrit literature, which has so much more of such material.
I have a couple of inquiries. Usually when people are writing, even though he's taking the liberties like a Horatian satirical way of writing, bringing comedy in, or even Menippean, which casts some moral judgment. He's not causing addressing religious things so much, even though he mentions God here or there, even challenges God. Usually the authors do reflect their own times, their own experiences, how they see things around them. Then he, as a satire writer, may take liberties about exaggerating it, which is part of writing in satire. The way he talks about, it means he hasn't left any individual as there is something like this. I'm talking about a time where there was Abhinavgupta, Belana, Somadeva, India's greatest giants were around the same, those 200-300 years, and even before that in Kashmir. But he was a student of Abhinavgupta, and so many different people were there in different disciplines. These talks must have been going. So I'm always, when I talk about Kashmir, but he is saying the king is horrible, the ruler is horrible. There is a demon, by name Jamba, who lives on earth as deceit personified by humans. Right. Then he talks about, when he talks about on God, he says Vamana, to put his head over Bali's head. He came as a dwarf. So Bali wasn't afraid that I'm going to be killed. Then he said, and you quoted the Shukra and Kubera story, in which also, and very misogynistic to some extent. It says, women, the hearts are hard as rocks. It's your translation. Indifferent to those who love them. Women are duplicitous, as false as buzzing of fly and as crooked as a snake, given to gambling and drinking. Men, he thinks, are fools. They get fooled by these women. Right? Inherently, they want power, they are deceitful, they want money, but deep human moral values, they are not challenging them. They go to temple, they do everything. But women, he talks in a very rough.
You got off the sound.
Oh, goldsmiths are bad. Physicians are bad. They just experiment and they kill patients. The painters, the metal workers, the alchemists. Buddhist nuns, 2-3 places. Your translation also he mentions. I don't know why he picks Buddhist nuns in that. But he probably was overshadowed by Abhinavgupta at that time, who wrote 40-some books on all different, whether it's aesthetics, whether it's, we are discussing Ishwar Pratna Vimarshani amongst a group of people. So I think there were a lot of big names. That's why he got a little lost that time. What I have one more question after. What is your impression of what I have said so far? Any validity in, or I can look into anybody's?
I am very glad that you are asking these questions, because I am encouraged by your questions, because it means that someone who is himself originally from Kashmir, you can feel a certain relationship with a writer from that land. But I would like to take this opportunity of giving you a slightly wider picture of Kshenendra. Though I have done the satires, and I deliberately did the satires because I thought that they deserve to be known in today's time, when they are simply not available to the general reader, and they can get an idea of not only of conditions in Kashmir, but also about how Sanskrit could be written and cover these matters. But it is also worthwhile to look at two of his works which reflect a religious confluence of the time. Kshemendra wrote a text called the Dashavatara Charita, 10 incarnations of the God Vishnu. And to my knowledge, that is one of the first such books which includes the Buddha as one of the incarnations. And includes the Buddha not just as an incarnation, but in very, very praiseworthy terms. Worth having a look at. And the other work which he wrote is the collection of Jataka tales. It is probably the last work he did. It is called the Buddhavadana, the lives of the Buddha. And everyone knows Buddha was the last incarnation, but before he became the Buddha, he had many, many incarnations before he reached the stage of Buddha. And he describes these incarnations. And in one of those incarnations, Buddha is incarnated as Indra, the king of heaven. So you see, you have this kind of overall connection between different types of religious beliefs, which he also reflects. And you mentioned Abhinavagupta and so on. You might have noticed, I think I mentioned it also, he has mentioned Abhinavagupta as one of his teachers. And of course, everyone knows that Abhinavagupta is a very big name. And as a matter of fact, just for your personal information, I have only yesterday received a new translation by a European Sanskritist, Abhinavagupta's translation and commentary on the Bhagavad Gita. And it is interesting for you to know, I just got it, I was looking at it. And the Bhagavad Gita, which Abhinavagupta translated 1,000 years ago, the text is a little different. The text which we know, courtesy Shankaracharya, which is all over the country. So you have all these kinds of things, and they're worth seeing, and they're interesting.
Actually, Kashmiri Gita has another 21 shlokas, the Kashmiri recension, as compared to the regular Gita that we read. And some of the words are different also in some of this.
So I'm glad you know these things. It's an interesting thing, and to discuss Kshemendra is, I think, a good way of understanding the variety and multiplicity of the cultural currents in Sanskrit literature itself.
This book that you received, is it Raphael's, the Italian who's writing on Abhinavagupta? Torello Raffaella?
It is just arrived here, and I've just got it. It's sitting on my writing table, and I'll tell you who I'll show it to you.
It's not so important. I can ask you later.
Since you asked me, show him the book. The translator is Boris Marjanovic.
Oh yeah. Well.
And this is a brand new text. This is just come out.
Right.
And Abhinavagupta calls his...
He's a Kashmir Shaivite. I have heard him. We have met him actually.
So anyway,
I have a question for you, personal question. I remember once reading something from Radhakrishnan, and he says about translation or transliterations or translations. He said it must be readable without being shallow, modern without being unsympathetic. Translator's anxiety is to render the thought, but he cannot convey fully the spirit. He cannot evoke in the reader the mood in which the thought was born and induce in him the ecstasy of the seer and the vision he beholds. I have to give you this thing. Your translation of the satires are beautiful. I have to commend you for that. And they convey, I think, what Shamendra was thinking when he was writing. And
thank you very much for telling me this. And I hope that the audience which is hearing this program will also take note of this, because I am hoping many of my Sanskrit translations have reached the United States. Some have even been republished in the United States. But I'm hoping that Kshemendra will join them also. And I hope that it deserves to, it is worth a wider spread. And I think that if I have been able in small way to bring Kshemendra out of the shadows before a more public gaze, it is just the beginning, which I'm hoping others will carry on. But thank you very much for your kind thoughts.
I think I'll take this opportunity to thank everybody here. Thank you, Mr. Haksar, and thank you, Mr. Jaiswal, for this enlightening discussion we had here. We at Indo-American Arts Council are trying to do our part to bring this vast knowledge to rest of the world. And the extent of our contribution to the world in the academic circles to some extent is known, but in layman circle where we belong to, some of us, is not known, both to the Indian audience and the audience at large in America. So we'll do our part, we'll do our share, and we want you people to be involved with us in our quest to do that. Thank you very much. Thanks. I want to thank all the audience for being here. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, I'm Neeli Lakhani, IAAC Literary Festival Director. I want to thank you for joining our award-winning authors and their wondrous stories. IAAC is a 501c nonprofit. Programs like the one you just watched happen because of contributions from generous folks like you. Please donate to the IAAC so that we can support our artists and sustain our cultural programs. It is simple to donate by visiting the IAAC website at iaac.us. Learn about the insider benefits that membership gives you. On behalf of the entire IAAC board, stay safe and see you at our next event. Thank you.